Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to another episode of Forensics Talks. This is going to be episode 91, and today my guest is Nicholas Harris. Now, this is the getting into the 90s here on the episodes, and I just wanted to say that we're going to be creeping up to the 100th episode sometime soon, and I've been thinking about trying to do something special for that one. And so I've got some ideas about maybe like looking back at like some best clips or some interviews, or maybe bringing in some different people on for that 100th episode. But I'm open to some ideas. So if any of you have any thoughts on that, I would really welcome you to, give your opinion on, what you think you want to see on the 100th episode, as it's just around the corner. Also, just as before, there is a chat window. You'll probably see it up on YouTube or like LinkedIn. And as always, I can see some people already punching in where they're from, because that's what I always ask. So Leopold, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But yeah, let us know where you're from. I always like to know, what parts of the world people are tuning in from. And as always, if you have any interesting questions or comments for the guest, please put them in the chat window as well. I'll vet the questions and so forth. And if we have a bit of time, then I definitely want to pose those to our guests here. So let's get on with it here, and we'll get started. So my guest today is Nicholas Harris, and he was born and educated in England. He obtained a Bachelor of Science Honors Degree in Podiatric Medicine in 1995 from Salford University. Nick worked in private practice as a podiatrist until 2002, and at that time he emigrated to Canada, and a change of profession saw him join the ranks of policing with the Peel Regional Police in 2003. In 2016, Nick joined the Forensic Identification Services with Peel Regional Police, and he soon found that his previous profession and education had applications in the forensic world as it pertained to criminal investigations. Now, Nick has advanced training in footwear impression examination. He's a qualified barefoot morphologist, and he's been deemed an expert witness in this field of study within the Canadian court system. In fact, he's now the only certified forensic gait analyst currently to be in Canada. He has been consulted as a forensic gait analyst in over 24 cases from multiple police agencies throughout Canada, and he's actively involved in research to help advance the field of forensic gait analysis. Now, this is a topic that I haven't approached before, we haven't talked about, but I saw Nick's presentation at the Ontario Forensic Video Analysts Association just this past year. I think it was in May. Maybe he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was really interesting. It was something that I'm not really exposed to a lot, and there are not a lot of people doing this. So I think it's a great opportunity to have him in here, and let me bring him in right here. There he is. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Hey, Eugene. Thanks for that intro.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Gait analysis is not something that I can find a lot of people doing, right? So it's not a very common practice just yet. Maybe there'll be more people in the future.
Yeah, no, it's relatively new to a lot of people, but it has been around for a while.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you, I always start with the speaker's like background and stuff like that, because I'm always curious about like people's pathway, and sort of journey to where they currently are. So university. So before university, were you already planning on being a podiatrist?
Well, it's quite a story, because as a kid, growing up, I was very sporty, and that's all I wanted to do. So you get to the age of what is it you want to do, and I had no idea. My grandfather was a professional soccer player, and when he retired in the 40s, the end of the 40s, he went into physiotherapy and chiropody, or podiatry. Then my father, he also went into podiatry. So me, the eldest son, here I go, what else can I do? And so I went into podiatry. Watching my father practice, it was all about pathologies of the feet and the legs, fixing people's ingrowing toenails and verrucas and all that lovely stuff. But when I got to university, realized there was a lot more involved, and especially when the biomechanical aspect came into it. My sporting background, that really took off, because I was quite a decent cricket player, but then I had 2 knee injuries, but both my knees, just for whatever reason, there was no sudden dramatic injury. They just started to fail.
Oh, really?
And so my cricket career was kind of put on hold, and off I went to university. But it was while I was there that one of the instructors took me aside and did a biomechanical assessment on me, and found out that my feet were flat, or they pronated a lot. And that caused a misalignment further up the leg, causing my knees to be painful. And he gave me orthotics, and the change was incredible. I became a faster runner, stronger runner, was able to bowl faster in my cricket, and just improved all my sport overall. So experiencing that firsthand really gripped me. So I was able to sort of take that into other realms, and I was finding ice hockey players, skiers, were all benefiting from orthotics in addressing biomechanical issues that they had. So taking that from university, once I finished, I got into private practice. I then started working at the football club, soccer club my grandfather played for. So I was the podiatrist for the team, and I was able to use the biomechanical aspect of my career in private practice, and then finally met my wife, and we came to Canada. She had Canadian citizenship, so I won't get into the whys and the whats, the why we ended up in Canada. And my intention was to continue with podiatry, but things didn't quite work out. The system's a little bit different here to it was in the UK. And me starting again in private practice in Canada with, no money, and you're not able to get any finance or anything, was going to be impossible. So it was either go back to England or make a change. And just so happened around that time, my wife's father, he used to work for Peel Regional Police. He came over to visit, and we went out one day, and he introduced me to some of his old colleagues who still work with Peel. One thing led to another, and I ended up joining the police service 20 years later, and here I am.
Yeah, it was. I was just going to say it's 20 years now, 2023. So I'm just curious though. So when you did come to Canada, it was probably, I have a feeling that I know this happens to like other medical professionals, but they pretty much have you start almost over again, right? Like re-education and all that other stuff. So it's a big investment in time and effort and money. It was that part of the issue.
Yeah, that was in part of it. There was a requalification examination that you could go through, but in the UK, the National Health Service, you can work as a podiatrist. But over here in the OHIP and the health system, they didn't have that. So it was having to go into private practice. And, maybe I could have done my research a little bit better. But it is what it is. And I have absolutely no regrets, because it's led me to where I am today.
As a podiatrist, when you're working on people, and I think I have a feeling that a lot of people that get into biomechanics and all these kinds of things, a lot of them I think are passionate about sports and helping sports players get better and recover and that sort of thing. But what is sort of the extent or scope of the parts of the body that you work on and you specialize on? Because it's not just the feet. There's other parts to the body that affect, how you're walking and your gait and all that stuff. So how would you describe the scope of, what you do as a podiatrist to others?
Yeah, well, it depends on the issue you're having, and it depends on what you're doing as well, because you can be looking at it that somebody comes to you with pain, they have an injury. And why is that happening? Like in my case with my knees, it was because my feet were overly pronated. That was causing the lower leg to rotate inwards, and that causes the knee to track out of place slightly. So the kneecap was actually rubbing on bone, causing me an immense pain. So by supporting the arches of my feet, straightened up the limbs. So we walk on our feet. We don't walk on our hands. So everything comes from the feet up the body. So if somebody has hip problems, back problems, neck problems, even shoulder problems, it could potentially stem from the feet. May not, but it's something that you would look at. So that's one aspect, somebody who has pain. But then there's another aspect where you can look at sports in general, people who are trying to improve what they do. Now, when I was coming through university, there was research with, I can't remember her name, but there was a well-known long jumper at the time. And they had it in the clinical setting. They were putting markers on the joints of the body, video recording, putting it through computer systems, and was saying, if you do this, this, and this, you'll break the world record, right? So the mechanical systems, the program was able to figure out that by doing this mechanically and by helping them with those mechanics, you can improve your sports performance. Doing it in real life is completely different. It's a different animal altogether, but in theory, it's there. So,
Right.
Biomechanics, it's the whole body essentially.
Right. So it's optimizing the person's mechanics, their body for what they have, and getting the most out of, their system, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned ice hockey players. I had an ice hockey player back in the UK. When he was turning, he was losing the edge of the skate. And we looked at it, and he also had a flat foot and just on the one side. So we did him some orthotics, and he actually, became a much more efficient skater because he was now getting that cutting edge on the blade and wasn't sliding out. That was a mechanical issue he had, and that helped him. So, it was things like that. Marathon runners, I did a lot of those. Their times would come down because they were more mechanically efficient. So, yeah, it was an interesting realm.
Yeah. And when you decided to move into forensic identification, so that was 2016, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Did you already have it in mind that, hey, I want to get back into this, or I want to use this, or did you just, when you got in, did you see an opportunity and say, hey, you know what, this is an area I think I can use my current skills with? Were you thinking about it beforehand?
No. So I've always been fascinated by the whole forensic world, and that's where I always wanted to be in policing. I just loved everything about it. It wasn't until I got into the forensic area that I sort of thought, hang on, my old profession may have some application here. And it didn't happen straight away. It was a few years after I started, and then I kind of realized. So, I mean, footwear analysis, you're looking at footprints and shoes and matching those. That's not something a podiatrist can solely do. That's anybody can do that in the forensic world. Barefoot morphology, again, we're matching shapes. So anybody with a good eye, I mean, even fingerprinting, people have a good eye for that. Barefoot morphology, it's not something specifically that the podiatrist can do. But when it came to gait analysis, and I started reading about it, I could see that there were podiatrists who were looking at it, and I realized, well, my understanding of biomechanics may be applicable here. But even still, in forensic gait analysis, it's not something that can only be done by the podiatrist at all. It just helps that you have that background.
Okay. In forensic identification, and I don't know how it works exactly at Peel, but I know in many places you're sort of a generalist. You learn a lot of different things. But do they allow you to go in? Like, are most people, do they sort of have, maybe somebody gets into fingerprints, maybe somebody gets more into, I don't know, bullet trajectories, or, you're getting into gait analysis. Did each one of you sort of have an area you were more interested in or you specialized in?
Well, I'm fortunate because at Peel, they look at people who want to specialize, and they will support you in that. There is areas in forensic which, when we go through our basic forensic training, we're learning photography, fingerprinting, footwear impressions. We do sort of like a basic in blood pattern analysis, but that's a specialized area. So people who have an interest in certain areas, they may specialize.
Okay. When you were starting to move into the whole gait analysis realm, what kind of resources were available to you, like for training and to get certified and, all the things that are required in order to make you an expert? Like, were they fairly well and readily available, or was it still something that's still being developed in 2016?
Well, not in Canada. So forensic gait analysis was being done in the UK a lot, and in the US was being done. And it was in the UK that I found the people who were really sort of pioneering it and pushing it. And it was at the IAI that they were running gait analysis workshops and lectures, and I attended those. I'm like, okay, well, this is something that maybe I can do. So 2 years running, I went to the IAI. The first year was sort of, okay, what's this all about? Let's learn a bit more about it. And then the following year, I actually did a certification in gait analysis. So
Okay.
yeah, I had to kind of go looking for it to see where the research was being done. Yeah, because it's now becoming more of an established craft, as it were, in forensics. So, and the UK and in particular has really been strong behind that.
So would you say the UK is sort of like the leading country with experts in that area?
They're doing a very, very good job. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about gait analysis. And I'm sure that when you go to trial, people are going to ask you, the lawyers ask you, so, Officer Harris, so tell me about gait analysis. What can you tell me? So I'll ask you the same sort of question. And, how do you typically describe it to the jury or the judge at trial?
Yeah, well, gait is essentially the way that we walk, we stand, we run. So gait analysis is the analysis of that. It's the analysis of the locomotion of our body in motion. So the forensic gait analysis is that applied in the criminal setting, right? When it comes to criminal investigations or the legal setting. So, we look at, the way the body works, but we're looking at primarily CCTV footage. So what's happening is a crime, let's say, has happened and it's been caught on camera, and the investigators, they have a suspect in mind. Now, forensic gait analysis, it's important to know that it's not an identification tool. It is primarily an investigative aid. So pretty much your investigations will start with your eyewitness testimony. If people are there, they've witnessed something. Forensic gait analysis, you will take the video that would have been taken from the scene, and we're looking at a subject, and we're seeing if that can be used, if I can see this person walking, and if I can start to identify sort of individual aspects of that person's gait. And I'm looking not just at the feet, the legs, we're going from head to toe, the whole body, the way the arms move, the shoulders, the hips, all the way down to the feet.
Okay. What are some of the earliest references to gait analysis? Either, in practice or sort of historically, where has it first been referenced?
So you can actually find way back Aristotle. So we're looking at like 300 BC, something like that. And what he found was he had a reed dipped in ink and attach it to somebody's head, and then the reed would drag along a wall. And then as that person walked, he could see that the reed was going up and down. So, that's one of the earlier sort of acknowledgements of simple gait, that somebody, when they're walking, something is happening, that they're seeing something happen. Now, you can also look at William Shakespeare. I know it's, one of his plays, The Tempest. So I think we're talking 1610, I believe that was. So in that play, one of the goddesses, Cirrus, I think it was, she's waiting for somebody to come along. And I believe it's Juno, the goddess of marriage, I believe it is. And Cirrus says, "Oh, here she comes. I know her by her gait." So Shakespeare was referencing gait. So it was known back then that, people walk and maybe there's something individualistic about the way that person walks. So you can go back quite a long way and see the sort of things have been written in history referencing gait.
Yeah, pretty amazing. And when it comes to the practice and the approach that you take, well, I guess to start off with, the real way that you work doing gait analysis has to be from video. I mean, I don't know how else you do it other than unless you're present looking at a suspect walking or something like that. But so you're working a lot with video.
Yeah, all the time. That's really the only way to do it at this time. And I mean, in a clinical setting, we can record somebody to the smallest degree of measurement. But on CCTV, we're looking at the person who's been advised to me. This is the person of interest, and I'm looking at them and I'm seeing, well, can I do an analysis of this person's gait? And that will depend on the quality of the footage and how much footage there is. There's a lot of things that go into that. But it's all from CCTV.
Okay. And I remember in your presentation, you were talking about that, you have, well, there's a few things. There is a code of conduct that you work to, for gait analysis. And there's also a tool. There's tools that you use, sort of like a checklist of items that you adhere to as a sort of protocol when you're doing your analysis. And if you don't mind, if I could maybe bring some of that up, maybe I can show people what this is and you can describe it for the people who are going to be listening to this later.
Yeah, so that's a tool that I use when I get my video footage. It helps me as a guideline to assess the video, whether the video is going to be of a suitable quality to use. So I'm looking at the clarity, the contrast. Is the image clearly visible? We're looking at lighting. How good's the lighting? What's the angle that I'm looking at the person from? So by looking at that chart, I can see what sort of things are going to be available to me to use. Now, the further right that I go in the checkbox on that chart, then it's not going to be as good to be used for a gait analysis. The more to the left that I'm starting to find checkboxes are checked off, that the better quality it's going to be. So it's good for disclosure as well. So when I get video footage, if the investigator, they're seeing something and I send it to them and say, look, this is just not good enough, and we end up with a bit of a discussion about it, then I can give them this and say, look, this is why, this is what I'm seeing. So
okay, so this is a tool that really assesses the quality of the video that you're being handed and maybe how appropriate it would be, or for use in an analysis.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I need to be able to see what I'm looking at.
Right.
If I can't do that, then there's no point in going any further. So this can sort of end a lengthy process early, rather than me spending a lot of hours working through an analysis when I know that it's just not going to be any good at the end of the day.
Is this form something that you've created, or is it something fairly standard that most people use?
There was a version, but I've created this based on the version that other people use. I just find it works for me.
Okay, let me move forward here. I want to get to the other tool here. It's this big, massive spreadsheet in Excel, and it's probably going to be too small for people to see, but it's a whole bunch of boxes. You've got Q numbers, a Q1, you got A1 to G, or maybe even more, and maybe even different tabs. So what can you tell me about this particular tool?
Yeah, so this is the Sheffield Features of Gait tool, which was developed in the United Kingdom. So Professor Ivan Birch has been prolific in forensic gait analysis. He and his team developed this. And what it does is it's kind of like a check mark, takes you through the whole process from head to toe. So the Q1, Q2, that will be referencing to footage. So Q1 will be footage 1, footage 2, and that's question footage. So the question footage will be from a crime scene, say. And I'll have the image that I'm looking at, and then I'll start going through this tool, this spreadsheet, starting at the head. What's the head doing? Okay, is the head moving left to right? Is the head held forward of the body? Is it tilted? We're looking for all these different little aspects. Now, it also depends on what angle I have and how much video I have that I'm able to use this tool, because some of the areas I won't be able to see. So if I'm looking at them from the front on the video, if there's a feature which is better seen from the side, then it's going to be difficult for me to comment on. So, for example, I'm looking at them directly head on. I may not see the angulation of the knee, which will then mean that I can't comment it on this form. So you go through the form, you end up checking off all the features that you see on the first piece of footage, and you do it for every other piece of footage that you have. And then when you get the reference footage, so the investigator has a suspect, which they've obtained video of them walking, and that's when I will do, independently of the question footage, I'll do an analysis of that. And then at the end of the day, we bring them together and we see how many of those features align. And
Okay.
then that'll sort of guide me as to how likely they are or they may not be.
I guess ideally you'd want, well, it'd be great if you get the suspect from all kinds of different angles, from different cameras and that sort of thing, which I guess sometimes you probably have some of that.
Yeah. And the thing is, in Canada, we don't have the CCTV system that they seem to have in other countries. Like in the UK, there's cameras everywhere. So the amount of footage you can get can be vast. Whereas over here, you may get one camera. And so it can be very limiting to what I can actually comment on.
If you had to have one angle, one camera angle to analyze a suspect, assuming it's daylight, nice and clear, what would that angle be?
Well, it's kind of a cheat, right? Because we look at the body in 3 different planes.
Yeah.
So one that captures all 3 planes, I guess. So kind of above and kind of to the side a little bit, so the front and the side. So that would be ideal. But yeah, the slides you put up here, these are the 3 planes that we can view the body in. So the sagittal plane, if you can imagine putting a plate of glass right down the middle of the body. So movement along that plane, that will be the sagittal plane. So I can comment on, how far does, say, the arm move when the arms are swinging? How far does it move in front of the body? How far does it move behind the body? I'll also be able to see, does he hold the head forward of the body? Does he drop his chin down? That's something that can be easily viewed in the sagittal plane. Your transverse plane there, it's like if you plate a glass right through the body, so twisting motions. Okay, so if the shoulders are, twisting, yawing, as we may call it, that's the angle that we'd see that. And then the frontal plane, also known as the coronal plane. Again, so anything that's moving away or towards the body. So if you can imagine the feet being out-toed or in-toed, we'll be able to see that quite clearly in the frontal plane. So an angle that accompanies or sort of covers all 3 of those planes would be perfect.
Okay. When you do the reference video, are you capturing that also from these so to capture these particular planes? Are you getting even more? Like, what's a sort of a best practice in order to get the right video as a reference?
Yeah. So ideally, your reference video, you want to have similar to your question footage, if possible. If not, then we just work with what we have. But at the end of the day, the investigator is going to be providing that video footage. I can help advise them on how to get that. But once they've identified somebody of interest, they may go to the mall. They may be able to get the mall footage of that person walking around. I've even had it where they've had in custody video footage. So they have to be careful, because if you start directing somebody to walk in an area, that can be problematic legally. Video in a custody suite it's known that it's there, it's fixed. But if you start, say you have somebody under arrest and you start directing them into areas they wouldn't normally be just to capture them on video, there could be a problem there, and you may be in the realms of warrants and things like that. So a lot of them will go out, the investigators will go out and they'll do surveillance, and they'll have a team with a camera videoing this person out and about. And, that can be problematic as well, because often I've had them where the video, they're panning as they're doing it. So you need a steady camera just watching this guy, walking around. So, there's a lot that goes into it, but ideally, they've want the footage as similar as possible.
Yeah, video is obviously really important, and there's a question here. I was going to ask you about it anyway, but it has to do with the frame rate of the camera. Like that, obviously, it must be important, because if it's really, like, you must consider the frame. If it's really slow, like a really slow frame rate versus variable frame rate. So I'm just wondering about the considerations there.
Yeah, well, ideally, what we look for is a minimum of 8 frames per second. Anything below that becomes a real problem, because when I'm looking at a piece of video, I can do it frame by frame, slow it down, and I can get some good detail of exactly what's going on. But if the frame rate's too slow and you're going frame by frame, then the jump in the image, you could have had a whole step go missing. So you want to try and higher the frame rate, you're actually capturing more of that person walking on the video, because you can lose a lot of detail, a lot of information with a low frame rate. Now, the other thing that can happen is with some of the systems that we get is you get compression in these video files. So the frame rate, if I do the properties of that video footage, it will tell me the frame rate is 20, 30, whatever it may be, but it's not. It's actually, it's done something to make that video more viewable, but the actual frame rate is very low. So, you have to be I'll have to be very careful when I'm sort of looking at that footage.
Right. There was a slide that I recall, and I have it here as well, so I'd like to show it, but it has to do with the way that you make conclusions and the way that you report conclusions. And I'll bring it up here in a second, but has that changed over the years in terms of, what people can say in a gait analysis opinion versus today, sort of what the standard is for that?
Yeah, it's continually being developed. So the one they use in Gait Analysis, as you're showing on the screen here, it was developed by the European Network of Forensic Science Institute, and they've adopted it for Gait Analysis. Now, you got to remember, Gait Analysis is not an identification tool. So there's no ratios out there that we can use to say it's X number of % more likely to be this person than that person. This is purely opinion-based. It's very subjective. And this is the sort of the list of conclusions as a verbal expression when you come to ultimately your end conclusion. So when I'm doing an analysis using this chart, if the video footage is no good, if we can't really see anything, you're going to be sitting there right in the middle. It's not providing any assistance. So we're either looking at it is more likely to be the person or it is not likely to be the person. So depending on how many features that you're seeing, which seem to align between your reference footage and your question footage, the higher at that scale you're going to go. But you're never going to have an identification. Now, different sciences in forensics have their different scales of conclusions, because barefoot morphology has a slightly different one. Fingerprinting, just has 3. You have it is, it isn't, or we don't know, simply. But yeah, in Gait Analysis, there's quite a few there that they use.
Okay. I was going to ask you a question about, as you're working on these cases, have you ever had any which were very difficult for you? Like, for example, in the sense that there's 2 people that look very, very similar in terms of their walking, and they could, for example, I can see a point where 2 people have the same style of walk, but they're different people too. And I don't know what the reason for that would be, but maybe somebody has a short leg and the other person has a short leg or something like that. But have you seen that a lot or not really? Like,
no, because when I get the footage from the investigator, it's very important that they let me know who I'm looking at. So they should know, if there's a video and there's several people on it. I mean, I've had footage from, shopping centers where there are dozens of people walking around. And if I didn't know who I was looking at, then, there's nothing, I can't do anything with that. So the investigator has to let me know who I am looking at. Now, where that can be an issue is we talk about eyewitnesses. I mentioned that earlier. So an eyewitness may see people or may see somebody and give a description. They were this tall, their hair was like this, they were wearing such and such clothing. And when the investigator looks at the video, you see several people who look exactly the same. So if that eyewitness was then able to say, but there was something unusual about the way that they walked, then that may allow us to hone in a little bit more. And it actually brings me around, because I was working a few weeks ago and just standing, on the side of the road, and I was just watching people walking. And there were 2 girls going to get a bus. and they looked identical. Same hair, same clothes, same height. Everything was the same. You wouldn't be able to tell. They must, whether they worked at the same place, I don't know, but they looked identical. But one of them, when she walked, it was like a horse trot. Her knees came upwards before they went forwards. And right there, that was a difference. So you have two people who look the same, but they walk differently.
Yeah, interesting. Different types of analysis, like one, for example, suspect height analysis is a way of quantifying, how tall a person is. And as I'm wondering if there are, like, currently, like on the list that you have, there's a lot of sort of this qualitative things. And I'm wondering if, for example, maybe you're watching a video and I don't know, maybe there's two people walking down a roadway or something, but height or something plays a factor, or there's something that it immediately tells you, hey, there has to be an exclusion here because of some minor difference. But have you ever run into any of that, or is any of that considered?
Not really, because I always know who I'm looking at. But in regards to height, I'll keep that separate from my analysis because I'm looking at the way that they walk. I'm not going to be doing those measurements. If that is something that the investigator wants to do aside and then as a complement to what I do, then that may work well. But as the gait analysis, it's purely visual. I'm using my expertise, and basically all forensic gait analysis will do that, is they're looking at the person, then what do I see? And they're not taking measurements. We're not objectively looking at it and obtaining data, because we can't do that from a video, because again, frame rates, angles, quality of video, I don't know what, if the ground is flat, I don't know what type of shoes they're wearing. There's so many different things which can play into something like height. So you were just looking at the way that the body moves on that camera.
Okay, I'd like to show the videos that you sent me, and it's in the next slide. So I don't, maybe or I guess I could keep playing it too, but maybe you want to just sort of give a description of what we're going to see here just before I show it, so people know what they're looking at. And I'll do the first one.
Yeah. So these videos were part of a research project I helped the University of Toronto do last year. And what we were looking to ascertain is whether a group of people were able to recognize people that they know, people that they work with, purely by the way that they walk. And what we did is we disguised a bunch of people. So they would get these videos, and they were given footage, as you see, of individuals walking. And when they got them, they got 5 videos, and they were asked to name, or asked to identify somebody by name. So they would have known, this person. They work with all these people. But you can see here, these 2 videos of different people. The difference is that you may be able to see. So for one, the cadence, the speed, the image on the left, the way the person walks, is a lot faster than the one on the right. But just the way that the arms move, the way the shoulder, the head's been held, there's a lot of difference there. The image on the right, you can see it's very stiff. The left shoulder barely moves. Those are the sort of things that we're looking at. We're looking at, what position are the feet in, and this is from the frontal plane only. So we're not looking from, the sagittal or the transverse. One plane, and you can see that there's a lot of difference there.
I have a question. Do you find that it's more difficult to distinguish gait on people who are younger versus people who are much older?
It's tricky. It depends on how young you're talking about, because the body's still developing, and gait can be affected by many factors like injury. So as you get older, your gait may change. If you have arthritis, for example, or you've broken a leg or something happens, that can change the way that your gait functions. So the young, like I said, when I was the other week, there was 2 young girls, and I could clearly see a difference in the way that they walk. So the very young, the ones that are still growing, their gait will change as they get older. But when we're doing gait analysis, normally we're using smaller time frames. So the crime would have happened. They're obtaining video pretty quickly. they're doing an investigation and they're finding a suspect. So I may be getting the video within a few days or even weeks or a month, but it's not going to be years.
Let me play the next video here. There we go.
So the first two are males. These are females. So these two, you can actually see how similar it can be between different people walking. So this is where the Gait Analyst really comes in, because they'll be able to sort of look into that finer detail. I mean, just looking at that as an eyewitness, you're not going to see much difference between them. But when I look at those, I do see the right foot, the character on the right screen there. There is a little bit of a difference there that I'm noticing, and the arms do swing a little bit differently, but they are very similar. So that can be some of the sort of the challenges that we have, and that's where the Sheffield Features of Gait tool really comes in, because it sort of allows you to keep everything organized and detailed.
So it helps to break that out, those little differences. It sort of scores them in a particular way.
Yes. And then when I come to my conclusion, it allows me to sort of speak to that.
Okay. You talked about research, and I do want to ask you a couple of questions regarding some of the other research that's been out there. And the name you mentioned before, Ivan Birch, that he comes up quite frequently. So he must be doing quite a bit of work in this particular area. But do you know him by chance?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Okay. Where is he out of? Do you know, is he with a university? Is he in private practice?
So he's in the UK and the Sheffield Teaching Hospital, I believe it is.
Okay, interesting. So there was a study that was, I think it was called the identification of individuals by observational gait analysis using closed circuit television footage, and they're comparing the ability and confidence of experienced and non-experienced analysts. So people that have no study or whatever, and then people who are deeply into this. What can you tell me about that particular study and some of the findings?
Yeah, so essentially, people who have no experience with gait analysis and people who are experienced with gait were given footage to review and compare. And they actually found that people with no experience were able to do this. In fact, they were more confident in their findings than people who have training in gait were. So it was interesting. And the research that I did with Toronto University found the same thing, that people with no training in gait were able to recognize people purely by the way that they walk. I mean, I found when we did our research, I had people coming up to me afterwards saying, "Oh yeah, I know who that person was by the sound of them walking." So they were picking up all sorts of stuff, and it just got them thinking. It's interesting that that they're finding this, they're seeing those things, but it supports the eyewitness testimony that somebody with no training can recognize that there is a difference in the way that people walk, and that's important when you go to court. So you speak to the jury, you're educating the court, that you can say, yeah, you can all do this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that's one thing which most people do understand, especially when it's somebody you're familiar with. I mean, I can't tell you, whether it's your kids or whether it's whatever, they could be across the shopping mall or whatever, and you can see them coming because, the way they walk, they have an arm that goes out a little bit more than the other or something like that. So I think from that regard, it's interesting. Do you think it's necessary there was in one of the studies, somebody had mentioned, that it really is unknown at this point whether or not that gait is something unique to an individual. And I'm not sure if that matters or not right now, but I'm just curious on your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, I think the courts like uniqueness. It's a definitive answer. But gait analysis as it stands now, and the way that we do it in sort of the forensic world, you can't say it's unique. In a clinical setting, you can measure smaller and smaller until you find uniqueness, but that's a clinical setting using advanced technology and computer systems. But with the advancements of artificial intelligence, I mean, where this could go, you've got countries like China and Russia who are already doing this.
Really?
They've got computer systems who are recording the public moving around, the biometrics that they're using to keep track on people, that it exists, and they're developing those systems. India are very active in the biometrics that they're using in catching their criminals. I think one case, they just used Gait Analysis and they sent somebody to death row for a rape and murder.
Really?
So yeah, other countries have taken it on board, but whether it's they're using it as an identification, I don't know. But eventually, the computers are the artificial intelligence is going to be so good that that's going to be used. But you're always going to need that human element to keep it honest. The verification process is important. So even if you have a computer which is doing this, the verifier will need to be a human being to say, yeah, that's right.
Have many of the tools that you use gotten better over the years? And for gait analysis, are there, I don't know, just maybe like the software you're using for video, or maybe other things that you're using for analysis on the image, for measuring and things like that? Are there tools readily available for people out there?
Well, for what I do, it's the better the quality that I can see on screen. That works for me. So I'm not taking measurements. So the software that I use allows me to view it, and as long as I can see it clearly, and I can use zoom in features, but I'm not changing anything on the screen. That's as good as it gets right now, but I'm not using anything else, any other technology. I mean, I'm sure it'll come, but right now it's if I have a piece of software that allows me to see that footage in the best image that I can see it, then that's what I need.
Okay, yeah. So video software is obviously the key piece of software or tool that you'll be using for sure. Let me ask you about future research. You obviously did some things with the University of Toronto, and I'm wondering, are you planning on some other things going forward, some other interesting areas? Or let me ask it this way: what areas of gait analysis require more fundamental testing and experimentation and study?
I just think more research along the same lines that we've been doing is to show that there's validity to what we're doing, that we can see differences in the way that people walk. At the end of the day, it's when we get to the courts that we're able to educate the court and say, look, what we're seeing here, there's a clear difference, or there isn't. So it's along those lines, really, because as again I say, technology gets better and better. I think research is going to be involved with that to see how reliable that's going to be. Mm-hmm. But the research is already being done right now. I mean, finding the time to do it is always an issue.
Yes.
But, I'd like to see in Canada more gait analysts being trained to do this. And then that's going to be a good thing, I think, for the future.
Yeah, I mean, you being one of the few, or the only one in Canada right now, I don't know, you must be lonely. You have nobody to talk to here.
It makes verifications a little challenging.
Yeah. I'm curious about trial, and challenges from defense or from Crown or whatever. What kinds of things do they typically ask you, as an analyst or an expert in this area? Have they ever try to throw you a curveball? Is there something that comes up over and over? Just curious about your experience at trial.
Yeah, well, all my gait analysis cases have yet to go to trial, so I've not had the pleasure of being crossed on gait analysis yet. But it has happened, and it has been accepted in the courts in the US, UK, and here in Canada. So back in 2009. In British Columbia, there was a case, R versus Aitken was the case. It was admitted and accepted as evidence. So, but
do you know what kind of case that was?
It was a shooting homicide, I believe.
Okay.
So, but there was a lot of questions after that one as to the way the expert conducted themselves. It wasn't the science of gait analysis, which was the problem. It was expert witness testimony in general. And I think that's where you really sort of, you sort of earn your mettle, as it would be in a case, is as an expert, is you're able to explain exactly what you're doing. So the court understands as well as you do what has been done. So if the court doesn't understand what you're talking about, then you haven't done your job, even though the evidence may be sound and everybody can see it. But if you can't explain it, then that's an issue.
Right. It doesn't. Yeah. Often that's a very common theme. It's not the science or the technology or whatever. It's usually the expert and their ability to even not only to explain, but to follow protocol too. Like if they're not following a procedure or some kind of a standard like you are doing with the Sheffield, is that what's called? The
Sheffield, yeah, Sheffield features a gait.
Yeah.
And it's a cautionary tale to people who want to get into gait analysis. Forensic gait analysis is, you may be very well versed in your craft, but getting to court, that's a whole different game. It can be a very lonely place. So if you don't know what you're doing there, then everything can unravel pretty quickly.
Yeah. So for those who do want to start looking into gait analysis, as a discipline that they are interested in, where's the best place to start right now?
Well, there's a ton of research and there's a ton of information on the internet. I'm always available if they want to, talk to me to get more information. It's really, you need to sort of where are you right now? If you're interested in gait analysis, what's your level of education at this current time? Because you have the gait analysis side of it, and then you have this sort of the whole forensic world. I'm fortunate because working in policing and forensic policing, that I've been exposed to a lot of that. But most people around the globe, they're not in my position. So the whole sort of the legal side of it it's a huge learning curve for them.
And is there a particular background that somebody needs to do this? You sort of answered it at the beginning, but I'm wondering if there is an advantage to having a background sort of like you have, because you are studying, things like the mechanics and a lot of different things related to the body. So what would you suggest there?
Yeah, if you have a background, a general understanding of body mechanics, biomechanics, that's a good place to start. But even there are gait analysis out there whose background is in video. They're video analysts. So it doesn't have to necessarily be, your background solely in the way that people move, human biomechanics. You have an understanding and be able to do those comparisons.
Okay. Hey, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, you are on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And okay, it's public profile. Could I show it? I don't know if you mind.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, I'm just going to put it up here. But if you are interested in sending a message to Nick here, available on LinkedIn. And I know it sounds like you've done some work for other agencies as well. They probably come to Peel and asked you maybe for some advice sometimes too.
Yes. I've worked with many different agencies throughout Canada. So it's gaining traction. I'm getting more and more work.
Oh, I'm sure, because I don't think people know where to go. So, they're probably looking for people, and unless they know you personally or know somebody who knows you personally, they probably don't realize that it's available to them. So yeah, Nick is here on LinkedIn, and Nick, look, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. It's an interesting topic that I haven't addressed before, and again, as you could tell, having a hard time trying to even find people. It sounds like there's just a small community of gait analysts around the world, and like you said, hopefully it's going to grow.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's going to be interesting what happens in the future. That's for
Excellent.
sure.
Well, thank you again. Hang back for a second, and then I'll come back and chat with you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Okay, folks. That's it. Somebody just made a comment here that they missed the first half. Hey, this is recorded. It's on YouTube. You can always go back. You can always look at the other episodes of Forensics Talks. Just go to the 3D Forensics channel on YouTube, and it's there. So look, I want to thank everybody for their time, for their comments, for some of the questions. I think we've answered most of them that are here, and we are planning to be back next week. Okay. And if not next week, it'll be sometime shortly there. And like I said before, if in the comments section, we're approaching our 100th episode. And if you have any ideas there of what you want to see, maybe a look back or somebody suggested bloopers or things like that, but we'll be happy to do so. So folks, thank you very much. Happy Thursday, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.